Now, you want to save your API's JSON data into SwiftData, but how would you even go about this? Come closer, come closer. I'm gonna show you. In this video, we're going to be looking at how we can interact with an API and save the response in SwiftData. Because I like to spoil you more than the kids on my Super Sweet 16, I even have a bit of a surprise towards the end of the video, so let's dive into it. All right, cool. So I've actually just got a starter project here, and this is from the GitHub, well, my GitHub, not the GitHub, it's from my GitHub, which you can actually download so you can follow along if you want to. Now, for this video, I'm going to be using Swift Concurrency Async Await. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this video, but I do have a crash course you'll see on the screen here that you can follow along if you want to learn more about this. And the API that we're going to be using for this is JSON placeholder, which again, I'll be splashing on the screen here. So you can see that we just basically got like a list with some items and a for each loop. But what we want to do here is actually replace this with the data that comes back from our API service. Because right now, yeah, it's looking a bit unseasoned, isn't it? Like all we got is salt and black pepper, and we want this to taste nice here. So we're going to put some more seasoning on this. We put some Old Bay seasoning, which to be honest with you, if you're American, right? I live in the UK. I recently just discovered Old Bay seasoning on Amazon. Yo, you guys are enjoying, man. But we want to make this look a bit nicer and use some kind of API. So what we're going to do is I'm going to work with the images endpoint, with the JSON placeholder. I'm going to work with that model, and I'll also add in some code for fetching data from the API. So at the bottom here, let's just add it in our model. And now we've added in our model. The next thing we want to do is just add in our code for fetching the data. So as you can see here, nothing too wild. We're just basically building up a request, sending it with the async await version of URL session to fetch data, and then decoding the data that comes back from our service. Okay, cool. So for this part here, what we actually want to do now is actually hook up our code. So actually listen to the changes that come back from the API. So at this point, we need to create some kind of state variable for our view to listen to. So at the top here, we're just going to add in a state. And then rather than having a random range here, this is actually going to use the photos. We use our photos, and then for our ID, we're just going to say use the ID that comes back from the service here, like so. And then now, before we start replacing stuff in our actual view, we want to, first of all, assign that value photos, well, the variable with the value here, photos. So that will set that. And then here, we now want to start to replace our UI. So where there's a title, we want to replace this with item. And then here, we just want to say item dot title. And then we had a rectangle here, but we want to replace this rectangle with a async image. So now we have an async image. We're using the URL, which is the image URL from the service, and we're just applying some styles onto async image. Now, if you look at our app, we're actually not seeing anything on the screen. And the reason why is because we're not actually calling that function to actually fetch our photos. So we need to actually call this at some point, and we'll just do it after our background here on our list. So we're just going to say task. And then we're going to use a do catch. Print out any errors just for now. We're not really doing any error handling in this video. I'm just going to say try, await, fetch photos, like so. Cool. So now in our previews, when we rerun this, we should now see some images. Yeah, so now you can see that we have our images on the screen coming back from the API. Right now, we're only fetching data from service, but we're not actually saving anything. So we want to create a model to actually help us save this data into SwiftData. Now, in my previous video, I did say that you want to isolate your data that you work with SwiftData and your APIs so they're not tied together. But in this video, we're going to break some rules and just put it together, yeah, because let's be honest, right? We all like to break a good rule, right? We're all rule breakers around there, bro. So let's break some rules. So the first thing we're going to need to do is actually tweak our model, because right now it's a struct, and with SwiftData, it only works with classes. So we're going to update this to work with the model macro. But before we can do that, we need to first of all import SwiftData. And then now we need to update our photo here to now be a model instead. So we're going to say model. and we're going to update this to be a class. So there's a few things that I want to do here, and the first thing is that I want to actually update this to be a variable, and I want this to use I'm going to make it optional, and I want this to be unique attribute. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because I don't want to allow duplicate photos with the same ID to exist in SwiftData, so this will just mark it as unique. So we're going to say attribute, and then we want this to be unique. Now the timing of this video is a bit annoying this because I'm using Xcode 15-bit. Yeah, Xcode 15 beta 5. But essentially with this, when you actually want to implement the Codable, you have to implement the entire, decodable and encoder, value functions and whatnot, which is pretty annoying. But I'm just going to quickly add these in now. And that should get away, that should get rid of any kind of errors. So at this moment in time, with this version of Xcode beta 15, you have to do this. In future versions, I'm hoping that they get rid of this so you don't need to do this anymore, but we'll see. Now, when you're setting up your model, the first thing you always want to do, if you don't forget to do this, trust me, you're going to get gray hairs and your skin's going to start looking stressed out, right? But to keep your skin glowing, the first thing you want to do, is at the root of your application, register this model so your app is aware of your SwiftData model. So let's go into the root of our application here, and we're just going to use the model container for, and then in this array pass in our photo.self so this doesn't break. And we also, as well as good habit, want to put this on our SwiftUI previews so that it doesn't crash. So on our preview, we'll also add that in as well here. Cool. So far our app is still fetching data. It's not actually saving it. What we're going to be looking into soon is how we can actually save that data, as well as some UX improvements. And I'm going to treat you with some more stuff that you definitely don't want to miss out. But if you're enjoying the video so far, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and as well, leave a comment down below to let me know what other types of videos you're interested in. So right now, our app is still fetching data from our service and using this state property here. But what we want it to do is actually fetch data locally from our storage if it exists. So what we're going to need to do is actually insert the data that comes back from our API into our persistent storage. Now, in order to do that, it's quite simple. We just need to access our model context. So I'm gonna add this in. So now we have our model context and we're able to access basically the bag of where our data is stored. Now with this model context, we want to use this when we're actually fetching our data. So rather than us assigning it to the state variable, instead we want to loop through all the JSON here that we have and insert it into our context. So let's replace this. And instead of doing this, we're going to say photos.forEach. And then we're just going to use the shorthand syntax to say model context.insert and then the item that is looping through. So now this will save all the items that come back from the service into our model context. Now we don't need to call save explicitly because by default autosave is enabled on our container. But if you wanted to on the next line to be safe, you could call save, but you don't really need to. Now, rather than us actually using our state property here, we want to use the query macro to now fetch our data that's been saved in our storage. So let's replace this. And rather than being state, this is going to be query. And with our query, I want to sort all the posts by their ID. And the reason why is because when you're actually saving data, it's actually possible that this isn't synchronous. So what I mean by that is that it doesn't save it one after the other in order. It's possible that you could have items being saved in random orders. So by sorting by their ID, it will always ensure that you get the correct order on your UI. So I'm going to say sort. Okay, cool. So now we have this basically using our photos ID using a key path to sort it on, and it's going to fetch all the photos sorted by their ID and put that on the UI for us. So let's just look at this in our preview. And if I was to just run this in the SwiftUI preview, we can just see now that we're able to see our posts, and these posts are actually what is from SwiftData. So it's not from the API service. So this is working exactly how we want it to. So I did say to you, I was going to treat you to a little surprise, and now dessert has arrived. So what is the surprise? So right now, what we're doing is that every single time we fetch data from an API service, we're always saving it and retrieving it, which to be honest with you is a bit inefficient. What we actually should do is instead have some kind of like caching limit that basically checks to see if we're within a time frame. And if we are, then get what's in SwiftData, or else make a new API request and save that so for next time. So what I want to do is actually add in a cache for like maybe 5 minutes that allows you to basically always fetch data from, SwiftData within that 5 minute range, or else make a new request to go and get some new data. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do to accomplish this is actually saving the time of when we last fetched some data. So in order to do this, we're going to use the app storage and use an integer to work with a time interval. So as you can see here, we've got our app storage last fetched, and we've just basically got our time interval here since 1970. So this will give us a number for us to store in user defaults. Now, after we fetch our data down below, what we want to do is we actually want to store the current time of when we last fetched and saved our data. So after line 118, we're now just going to say last fetched is equal to date dot now dot time interval since 1970. So now we're always saving the date that someone has last fetched the data up. And the next thing we want to do is we actually want to create a function that will check to see if we've gone above the 5 minute limit. So we're going to create a function here. And the only purpose of this function is to check to basically just do a date comparison. That is it. Now I'm going to do 5 minutes and I'm working with seconds, but if you want, you can tweak this to 1 minute, 2 minutes, an hour. You just got to basically figure out what it is in seconds. So what we have is our time limit, which is 300 seconds. So 300 seconds is 5 minutes. And then we get the current time, which is now. And then we actually convert the last fetch time that's in user defaults into a date object so we can do some kind of comparison. Then we'll basically get the difference. So just so it's easier for us to read, then what we'll do is we'll use the current calendar to actually compare the date in seconds from the last fetch time in user defaults to the current time right now, and to get the difference in minutes. Now, if the difference in minutes between these two dates is greater than or equal to 300, then we've exceeded the limit and we'll fetch some new data to save into SwiftData, which is what we want to do. All right, cool. So now what we're going to do is use this function in our code when we're actually trying to fetch the data here. So we're going to use a condition. I'm just going to say here, if it has exceeded the limit, and we're going to need another condition here, because if you launch the app for the first time, you actually don't have any time cache on the device. So we're going to add two conditions here. The first one is if you've exceeded the limit, or if you don't have anything saved in SwiftData, then we'll force the app to go and fetch that data for us. Now, what you could do alternatively here is if you didn't want to check to see if the photos in a database is empty and it was like the first time someone launched the app, you actually could also as well have a Boolean flag to essentially be like, if it's your first time launching the app, which I've shown in a previous video where you pre-fill data, then fetch it. Now, we want to test this out on an actual simulator because on the SwiftUI preview, I can't clear data and, manipulate the time. So let's just run this on a simulator to see what happens. And I'll just put a breakpoint in here to just show you what's going on. So we'll close this canvas. Cool. And as you can see, because this is the first time that we've launched the app, we're actually hitting here to actually fetch our data. So this is basically doing what it is that we want it to do. So I'm just going to run this on. And you'll now see that when these images finish loading, it's all good. So I'm just going to disable this breakpoint, let it keep running. Cool. And you can now see that this is all good. Now, if I re-enable this breakpoint again and we run the app again, it shouldn't hit this breakpoint, and instead it will just basically ignore this code to fetch the photos. As you can see, it doesn't hit the breakpoint. Now, if I want to test out actually fetching a new set of data again, what I could do is down below, rather than me having this set to 5 minutes, because right now, I might as well go and watch the new season of Baki. If you're watching the new season of Baki as well on Netflix, man, let me know in the comment section below because Pickle's crazy. So I'm gonna reduce this from 5 minutes in seconds, and we'll just change this to like 1 second now. So what will happen is that every single second this will trigger a new fetch. So if I was to run this again now, when this is set to 1, what should happen is it should hit our breakpoint. So let's just see if that does that. And you'll see now that our breakpoint gets hit. So our logic here for checking our cache is actually working exactly how we want it. So we've got a big performance boost now because we'll only fetch data from an API every single 5 minutes, which, you know, will speed up our application. Now, what we want to do as well is pause. So I said I was going to spoil you, but do you want 2 more treats? Because I can give you 2 more treats if you want one. Let me know in the comments if you want 2 more treats. So that's all right. I'm going to give you it anyway. So another treat I want to give you is that personally, in my opinion, when I'm working with SwiftData or like Codable or any kind of database, if I want to fetch, fetch new data and actually cache it, I personally prefer to actually clear anything that's there previously. So what we're going to do is before we fetch these photos, we're actually going to write some code to actually clear everything that was previously saved. So below our has exceeded limit function here, I'm going to create a new function. What we're just saying here is on the model context, we want to delete everything that's in the model photo. So this is everything that's within this storage. And we just want to call this function before we actually fetch our photos. So right here, we're going to say clear photos like so, and then it will fetch it. So now we're going to perform that cleanup. And another thing that I actually want us to do is that when we're fetching data, we actually don't give the user some kind of feedback that something is going on with the, API. So in order to get around that, we actually are going to add a state property here called isLoading and show some kind of progress view that something is going on. So I'm going to say state private var isLoading is equal to false. It's just going to be a Boolean. It's going to be equal to false. And then when we fetch our photos here, so we perform our task, we're just going to say isLoading is equal to true. And then we're just going to use, that's really annoying that Xcode does that with the capitals, man. That needs to change. So it's true. And then we're going to say defer isLoading is equal to false, like so. So it always makes sure the last thing it does is set this back to false. Now, outside of this task, so I'm just going to collapse this. We're going to use an overlay. And then we're just going to say here, if it is loading, miss out the if. So if it is loading, then show the progress view. Okay, cool. Sweet. So I'm just going to delete this app off the simulator to just see if this is all good. And we'll just run it fresh for the first time. And we should see a progress view now. And we do see a progress view and it now comes in with our screen. So the UX just looks nicer. All right, cool. So listen, I think I spoiled y'all completely because now we've got an app that does, caching into SwiftData. I showed you how to save codable objects into SwiftData as well, and some other UI and UX improvements to just help your app, run smoother and also handle other edge cases. So if you enjoyed this video, I actually do have other videos on my channel around SwiftData. You can check out here. You should see on this side of the screen. I hope I'm putting in the right direction. And I also have courses on, that I do as well that you can actually check out in the link in the description box below if you go onto my website. That's everything from me. I'll catch you on a bit. Deuces.